Hey everybody, welcome to Friday Night Writes, a podcast about writing. My name's BigFuzzy. With me as always is Jonesy.
Hey everyone.
Tonight we're going to talk about world building. We're going to talk about our personal process, how we go about doing what we do when we write. But first, we're going to talk about some of the new stuff that's been added into the Friday Night website.
Well, Fuzz, before we get into some of the new features that were added to the site, which I just added this past week, splitting out some of the links for the blog, I wanted to just take a moment to remind everyone or to inform everybody who's new to us what exactly we're all about. So Friday Night Writes is a writing community, and this is a podcast that's attached to our writing community. We're at FridayNightWrites.net. You may not have found it that way. You may just have found us on YouTube. But what we're after is we're trying to create a community for writers to come and share their short fiction with a community of people, of other people who want to start out writing or who are interested in helping others write, who are interested in reading, short fiction, and getting involved in a community by critiquing, by adding to the conversation about writing.
Yeah, I think for me, what a lot of it really, the important part of it for me is getting people involved who are interested in participating in just the conversation and getting more of a dialogue going back and forth. I love going to my profile and seeing my reads going up and seeing lots and lots of reads on stories. That's great, but when I don't hear anything about the story, then I'm left thinking that I'm perfect and that I have no room to grow as a human being and that I've already reached the apex of my capability. And then a part of me says that may not be true, that it would be good to start hearing some kind of feedback. And it's cool because I get that on Facebook, but I don't get it on the site itself, and that makes it, kind of difficult to track back and forth all the time.
Sure, and we don't want, we don't want anybody to be shy, and we've tried to make the sign up process as easy as
as pumpkin pie.
Yeah, that's right. As uninvasive as possible. All you need is an email address. You can, when you go to the website, if you go to FridayNightWrites.net, up at the top along the little navigation bar at the top, that'll probably look familiar to you. At the right-hand corner, there you're going to see the word login. You click that. If you've never logged in with us, if you haven't signed up, you'll have the opportunity to sign up from that page. You can sign up with Facebook, so it just links your Facebook account directly to us. And then you don't have to log in, with a username and password. Or if you don't want to tie your Facebook in, I understand. I'm like that sometimes too. You can just set up a username, use an email. That's all we need. We'll send you an email just to say, hey, is this you? You click on a link in the email and then you're registered.
Yeah, and if people do sign up from Facebook, we can't, there's no way that
we can't post anything to their timeline or anything like that. It's just for the authorization piece because it's easy for a lot of people.
Right.
Like my mom, for instance, that would be easier for her. That's why it's there.
Yeah.
So that's one thing we wanted to get out right away is that, this is who we are, this is what we're after, this is what we're doing. We're trying to just build up this community of people to come together and write together and talk about writing. As far as some of the new features to the site, we've focused recently on trying to provide more things that will drive dialogue on the site. We've been posting prompts try to post them every weekend, then that are due Friday. So the prompt is posted, you write based on what's in the prompt, and then you post it by the next Friday. Therefore, Friday Night Lights.
Right.
So what I did was I had all of this kind of stuff on the blog, like our announcement about our podcasts were on the blog, any news for the site was on the blog, prompts, yada, yada, yada. What I did is I separated those out. So they're in categories now, and at the top in the navigation bar on the website, there's 4 different links for those now. So prompts, if you click on that, it's just going to be prompts. If you click on news, it's just going to be news about the site and about our community. If you click on podcasts, it's just going to be podcasts. And if you click on blog, there's going to be a little bit of a grab bag, but what we wanted to do there is we wanted to take that opportunity to write more about writing and try to drive the dialogue a little bit more about writing and share resources that we found or that we've come across, in our daily lives, looking into writing and trying to improve ourselves. And I know you've mentioned that you would like, Fuzz, you'd mentioned that you'd like to write more about your process and post it there.
Yeah. What I'd like to do ultimately with the blog is something kind of similar to what some of the nerd sites do, but just not just about, here's new picture of someone on the set of Star Wars, but here's, like the Book Smugglers Publishing is looking for submissions. Like, there's another one that I'm going to post this week. I don't think it's sketchy. I just, the idea of having to spend money to sign up for one of these things is, it's kind of touchy for me. I don't like the idea of having to give over cash just so you'll read my story. But there's another one that's like the Book Smugglers Club, but they're offering $5,000 for winners of their contest, and so I'm going to post that this week, as well as occasionally interesting stuff that I see floating around. Stephen King has tons of stuff. He's constantly posting interesting stuff. And there's a couple other writers that I've recently kind of fallen for. The Rothfuss guy, I didn't really know too much about him until a couple weeks ago when we were all hanging out on the back porch over at Sean's. And since then I've looked into the guy, and he's a total nerd. Mm-hmm. And I mean, he's the kind of dude that, if you met him, you'd be like, you got to come hang out with us. You belong with us. Yeah. And he's got some really great stuff, especially on YouTube. And so I want to post some stuff like that, as well as just, process and, hey, little doodads like, sort of daily affirmation, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me. People seem to like those kinds of things, so.
Sure. Well, we touched on it a little bit, so Fuzz, what's your process?
Well, it kind of depends on what I'm doing. If I'm doing short fiction, then I bring up YouTube. I'll usually throw on a documentary, something that's going to be at least an hour and a half, 2 hours long, and I use that as a measure. Once I stop hearing stuff, then it's time to take a break, get up, walk around, run to the gas station, grab a soda, whatever it is, and then come back, start another one, and I just, while whatever it is playing, I'll just plow through. I know a lot of people can't listen to, I just listen to science documentaries or history documentaries. I don't really dig into a lot of stuff that's going to be necessarily super engaging, but I need something that's at least marginally interesting, something to think about while I'm writing, which I know a lot of people don't do that. They need absolute laser beam focus. I'm not that way. I can just throw up a good documentary or two, make a small playlist, and then I'll use that as my time. If I'm writing Autumnville, if I'm writing the novel, then that's a whole different thing. I get on YouTube, I plug in at least a 10-hour long rainstorm, and then I'll put on my music. I'll lower the rainstorm to about 20%, music at about 50-60% as far as volume goes, and then I bring up Q10, which is a word processor program that you bring up, and it turns your whole screen jet black, and it gives you these real nice mellow yellow letters that doesn't really mess with your eyes too bad. You don't have that persistent white glow, and then I'll usually spend 10, 15, 20 minutes going over everything that I've written so far, or at least just the last couple of chapters. In the early parts, I could go through and reread the whole story and then start writing. And usually while I would go through and read it, I would actually go through and do editing while I was doing it. And then when I would start writing, the playlist that I had on Spotify would be, say, a 2-hour long playlist, or a 5-hour long, or longer. I've had 7-hour long playlists. There's been days that I'll get off work and I'll say to myself, I'm writing 10,000 words tonight, and I'm not stopping until I hit 10,000 words. And so I'll plug in a 5-hour long playlist and turn on the rainstorm, and I'll go through and I'll read. And then once I've gotten right to where I left off, my brain's already started to fill in those blanks, and now all I'm doing is I'm just transferring what's in my head onto the page. As far as like prep goes, I do most of my prep during the day when I'm at work. My job is pretty monotonous. I do the same few things over and over again all morning. I don't really have a whole lot of crazy stuff going on, so I'm kind of able to, start a story in my head or continue from where I left off. And then what I'll do is I'll sort of plot out, or I'll sort of get the rough kind of schematics of where I'm going to go, done, what I'm interested in doing. And then from that point, once I've kind of figured that out, then what I'll start doing is a series of kind of what ifs. I'll go and say, well, what if, and then I'll go to the most disastrous thing I can think of. And then I'll try and figure out, can I rescue the story from that? Is it possible to pull back from just laying waste to my plot line, just punching holes in it like crazy? And then I'll sort of stress test the story that way. And then by the time I get home and I start writing it, I feel like I've really, gone to a lot of different extremes with it. And so once I actually see the page and I sit down to start typing, I know that whatever I'm putting down is going to be the happy medium of what I wanted versus what I feel like the story needs versus what I think that the reader might enjoy. Even though that's kind of something that I've gotten away from in the last year, of now that I'm on my lucky 5th draft of the novel, I'm saying to myself, I don't really care what the audience wants. What I want is, I want a story that I'm happy with, that I'm proud of, that I'm really excited, I'm really hyped up about, something that I want to read. And so that's really what I've been kind of putting forward. As far as other stuff is concerned, pack of cigarettes, and or if I'm not smoking cigarettes that week, if I'm just smoking my e-cig, then make sure I got lots of juice for it, and a couple sodas and a couple of bottles of ice water, and usually I'm ready to go. I don't necessarily have to do much more than a little bit of music, maybe a documentary or two, and then I'm off to the races. As far as like prepping for the actual story, though, what I can do, I'm notorious for Bibling. I like to spend a great deal of time, if I can, before I actually commit words to page, just kind of imagining the world. One of the things that I like to do is, the last thing before I go to bed at night is I'll lay down, close my eyes, and then I just sort of start imagining my story as a movie playing on the inside of my eyelids. All the way down to the font of the words, the title, the whole thing, and I'll start kind of envisioning it as a film and seeing how it sort of plays out, and inventing things as I go along, or modifying things. I'm a big fan of idea mining. I don't like to call it stealing, but the idea of going to Google and just typing in concept art, and then going through and seeing what some of these really amazing artists have done for science fiction, or for supernatural, or for horror, or what have you. And just sometimes just letting those visuals just kind of inform you as to what certain things might look like, or how they might behave. I find that really helps out a lot. I'm not a big on sitting down and watching movies, or reading other books in prep for doing stuff. I tend to kind of stay more focused on building the world from visual aspects, and then just pictures usually. Occasionally though, you find on YouTube that there are some really great short animations and stuff that people have made just about random things, and you might find one that's completely off topic of what you're interested in doing, but for some reason it inspires you in a way that that you didn't expect. There's a particular one that I'm a huge fan of. I don't recall the name of it offhand, but it's a short song. It's about 3 minutes long, and it's just an animation of these two figures, a male and female figure, and they're just sort of dancing back and forth. And it's a real melancholy song. But sometimes if I feel like I'm going to write something that's going to be a little more on that kind of melancholy side, I'll run that through 3 or 4 times, and I'll have that in my head as I'm writing. But as far as like prep is concerned, I'll spend a lot of time before I commit anything to paper just trying to figure out all of the bare bones basics of my world, and I'll write all of it down obsessively. But even then I'm not a scribbler, I'm not a doodler. Like I have my notes broken down in ways that drive some of the other guys crazy when they see them, because it's like in my mind, I'm a big fan of like H.P. Lovecraft, who wrote lots and lots of letters back and forth with friends, and even some stuff about Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. They were notorious for doing the same thing. And when you read their stuff, you realize that people are poring over this stuff years after they're dead. And so I'm saying to myself, like, let's say I get that lucky where someone actually cares what I've written after I'm dead, and they find my notebook. I don't want it to be filled with nonsense and doodles of dick and balls and all kinds of silly stuff.
Yeah.
I want it to be concise and informative, and I want it to be something that somebody can pick up and go, oh, okay, well, here's where he's coming from, and here's what he was thinking when he did this, and here are the references and influences that kind of fueled him, which is 90% of the fun of it for me, is just kind of trying to figure all that stuff out. World building is one of my favorite things to do. I love just building whole world ideas, whether it's for tabletop role playing or for fiction or whatever, of just developing worlds and then just kind of handing it off to someone else and saying, go play. Like, I'm going to make something new. You guys have fun with that, and yeah, I mean, that's really it for me. How about you?
Well, I don't have as defined of a process, but I mean, my goal for any short story, which is all that I've worked on so far. I have not gotten into world building, which we'll get to. I have not gotten into a novel idea that I'm married to yet. So, what I do a lot of the time is I take something I've heard in a podcast, or I take something I saw in a movie or on a television show, or something I've been reading, and I pull ideas from the periphery of those medias. Mm-hmm. So I'm working on a story now I've told you about, but it has to do with the Fermi paradox and why haven't we encountered alien life. That all came about because I heard a podcast about the WOW signal that SETI intercepted, this signal that went off the charts back in 1979 or whatever. Yeah. I heard a podcast about that, and I was like, I think I have a good idea here. So I pulled something from the periphery of that media to go into the story that I wanted. And I do that a lot with the short fiction. So then once I have that idea plucked out of, the air, basically, then I sit down and say, well, do I need to research anything? I wrote The Lady of the Number 6 recently about a genie, basically, and 2 coal miners. I don't know anything about coal mining. Nothing. So I got up one morning, got my coffee, got my glass of water, went down to my office, sat down, pulled up just to ignore this music playlist, kicked it on, went to Wikipedia, and started researching coal mining, specifically in eastern Kentucky. Once I got through that, I was able to pull in my setting and start outlining some of the things that I wanted to hit, some of the feel that I wanted that story to have, the mood, everything like that. And then once I got through that, usually when I get up in the morning, I do that, and then I look down and I'm like, oh, crap, I got to go get ready for work. So I go to work, and maybe at my lunchtime I'll spend a little bit of time outlining the story. Then in the evening, if I have time, if I'm not doing anything with my kids that night, then I'll sit down and I'll commit some words to paper. But the next morning, everything's still up here, it's still in my head, and I sit down again at the desk in the office, and then it's time to write. And for me, I'm pretty new at this, but I can sit down with an idea, especially for a short piece, and I can finish it in an hour and 30 minutes. It's nothing profound, but I don't have any problems moving through the story that's up here, or if I've not been lazy and I've outlined it, boom, I just spit it right out. I don't have any issue doing that.
Right.
Now, the planning stage is something I've been way too lazy about. Planning my story, planning my characters, planning. So I have been focused on recently planning things better. Sitting down and defining the outline of my story. Sitting down and saying, I want this to be the beginning, and I want these things to happen here. This is the middle, I want these things to happen here. This is my climax, I want this to happen, and then this is how I will resolve the story. I haven't put it into practice for anything new recently, or yet, so I don't know. I mean, hopefully it'll work out for me, but I've more been a fly by the seat of your pants writer. And so, really, it's that simple. I write on a minimalist type of screen also. I've used Evernote a lot, but I've since moved to the Atom editor from GitHub, which is a full-featured text editor, basically. But you can write code in it and everything like that. So, but I've been using that a lot, and it's minimal, distraction-free, because I get distracted easy.
Yeah.
You were talking about it first, about how you put on a documentary and you get going. That I cannot do that.
Yeah.
I cannot multitask. It is you talking about multitasking makes my head spin.
Yeah.
I just cannot. If there's something else going on, I'm like, well, that's shiny.
Yeah.
I need to go look at that for a little bit instead of doing what I'm doing. So I'm one of those people that you were talking about who can't really do that. But my process is as simple as it gets, really. And honestly, a part of my growth right now is finding my process. It's finding my routine. It's getting into my routine. It's trying to write the same time every day, or for the same amount of time every day, or when inspiration hits, instead of sitting and finishing watching a football game or finishing watching an episode of Parks and Recreation, I turn that off, I pull out the laptop, and I start writing.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big part of what I'm dealing with, or what I'm trying to cultivate and get better at.
Yeah.
And I think the process that will come along with that type of routine will...
I think one thing that's important, especially in the early days, because when I first started writing, everything I wrote in comic book script format. And so it was super visual, and a lot of that lingers in what I do today. I'm real big in set direction and adding in minutia, sometimes pointlessly. But I know that one of the things that's worked for me in the past is that if I'm going to say, like right now, every day, I have a minimum of 500 words. It doesn't matter what it's on. It might be me blogging about something on Facebook. It might be tinkering with some of these other stories, which, by the way, it was August 15th, 1977, and specifically the key signature was 6EQUJ5 for the WoW signal.
Yeah, you're right.
And because that's part of a story that I'm working on for Autumnville, one of the short pieces. One of the things that's kind of key, especially in those early days when you're kind of finding your process, I think is I used to wait until inspiration would hit. Sometimes go 2-3 weeks without committing a single word to paper. And then I got to a point where just the general drudgery of life was making it so that sometimes I was going 2-3 months without putting anything on paper. And we're in a better place now, I think, because we all have each other to kind of play onto, and we can guilt trip the hell out of each other so that we're consistently putting out new stuff. But back then, when I was working alone, a lot of it boiled down to me saying, okay, if I'm going to do this, I need to commit. And so for a long time, I had a 250 word minimum a day, where it would be, even if it's just a really long status update on MySpace or Facebook, that was going to be, I was going to write something every single day. And I would do that, whether it be blogs or fiction. Now it's up to about 500 as the bare minimum. Like, I'm going to put 500 words into something tonight before I go to bed. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Tomorrow morning I'll get up probably around 5 a.m. and chances are I will add in another 100 or 200 words by the time I'm done, before I go off to work. And then, it'll be get home, have a couple hours to kill, try not to pass out, bang out a couple more 100 words, then I've got the rest of the night to kill, go over to Sean, sit on the back porch, hang out, do whatever I'm going to do, if I'm going to read or what have you. But the key thing is that, is that every day you have a set period. And what you'll find over time is that once you've begun to develop that routine, it doesn't, at least for me, it doesn't necessarily have to be the same time every day, but I know some people do that. I know a lot of, like, the heavy hitter writers, like Stephen King talks about how he gets up and he'll have breakfast and then he'll write from like 8 to 10 in the morning, and then he'll read the paper, have some lunch, and then hang out all day. And then maybe at night he might write something, but probably not. And he's writing for like 2 hours a day.
Yeah.
And when you take into account how prolific he is, he must be pumping out thousands of words in 2 hours.
Right. But he's also been into that mode for years.
Yeah.
I mean, decades.
And I think that's the important thing. I think you hit it on the head, because inspiration will hit when you're writing. If you just keep at it, right. It won't be one of those things. I mean, you always get a cool idea, some random idea, and I know a lot of people have their phones so that they can constantly put down ideas and stuff that they've had, and I'm definitely one of those guys. Like, if I have a really cool idea, I will repeat it like a mantra until I can get somewhere that I can write it down so that I won't forget it. But
I think a lot of the stuff I've read, the idea, like setting a goal for the day, works for a lot of people. Like, that's my goal too, is 500 words. But my commitment to that goal hasn't been the greatest, especially recently. But a lot of like what you said, inspiration will hit when you write. A lot of the common advice you see from writers is to just write. And it gets frustrating for people, and I've seen this on Reddit and some of the places I hang out, because people are like, hey, does anybody have any advice
that isn't
just right?
Yeah.
Because that's ridiculous. But it's not ridiculous. That is exactly what you need to do. And it's sometimes it's like, well, I don't have anything to write about right now.
Yeah.
So I'll just watch television, or I'll read, and then maybe, if you can pull things out of that, like I do, and I kind of do anymore, almost sickeningly, like where I can't even keep up with the inspiration that I'm pulling. I'm like, oh, this is cool. Oh, this is cool. This is cool. This is cool. This is cool. And by then I'm just like, so there was a pretzel that was gigantic, and he started fighting a dragon. I don't know what I just thought of. Like, it's just nonsense at that point.
Yeah.
So, the inspiration hitting when you write, just keep writing, and that's why that advice is good advice.
For writers, one of the key things is when you get into that point where people say, do you have any advice on writing that isn't just right? For me, the way that I got over that hump was to take a couple of days, maybe a week out, and start really thinking about the kind of stuff that I thoroughly enjoy. The kind of music that I really, not the stuff that I'm aesthetically drawn to. I'm an art rock guy. I like Peter Gabriel. I like The Cure. I like, stuff that if you were to look at me, you'd go, oh, he's a Slayer guy. But I like The Cure, for Christ's sake. Soul coughing, all that kind of stuff. But then when I start thinking about genre, that's when I really start getting kind of hyped. When people say, well, do you have any advice on writing that isn't just writing? The first thing that it comes to my mind is take a minute and really kind of probe deeply and figure out what it is that you really like. The stuff that you think is super cool. And then start developing an idea that's in that wheelhouse. And if that means jumping on the net and looking through pictures or watching videos or doing whatever it is you got to do that. But, once you've got that idea in your head of that something that you thoroughly think is awesome, and you start committing that to paper, you can't go wrong with that. Because everyone might look at this and go, this isn't for me. This giant pretzel, with dragons and stuff, this isn't for me. But for someone, it is. And that someone out there, there's a shitload of that guy. That guy is, there's millions of that guy. And it might take him a while to find it. But sooner or later, he's going to find it. And when he does, he's going to go, this dude thinks like I think. He likes giant pretzels that kill dragons.
Well, there's a large population of us in the world.
And at the end of the day, that's the cool thing. That's what matters. You wrote something that you genuinely think is awesome, and sooner or later someone else out there goes, hey, you know what, this is cool, I dig this, and I think that's really the only advice that you can give to people, because when you see, like I see a lot of stuff by Neil Gaiman, and he says that all the time, just write to completion, but he does it in that Neil Gaiman way that makes you feel super inspired, that you're like, I can fight Superman.
Yeah, and Chuck Wendig is the same way, like it's just right, but he says it hilariously, and so you're like, oh, okay, I
so
feel way better about this
I can do that.
Yeah, for sure.
And I know that, like, in the case of, like, Neil Gaiman, it's because he gets asked that all the time. Guys like Wendig, Gaiman, Stephen King, these guys get hammered with that because everyone thinks that they've got that magic key that they don't have. And the truth of the matter is that each one of those guys started off writing something that they thought that was super cool, and they just developed the shit out of it.
Yeah.
And they were relentless with it. I know Stephen King, in the case of, was it Firestarter or Carrie?
I think it was
Carrie.
Carrie.
Yeah, he threw it away.
Yeah.
And his wife dug it up out of the trash and was like, actually, this is really good. He's lucky he had that support system going for him. The rest of a lot of us don't have that, but when it comes to the stuff that, whenever you're saying to yourself, do you have any advice on writing? Yeah, the only advice that you can really give them is just say, find what it is that makes you hyped to write about, and develop it. Don't just sit down and start writing, Drogath the heavy sacked walked into the bar and all the women fell to his feet. No, it's take 10 minutes and find out where this guy came from, what he's all about. Develop it as if he was a real guy. Develop your idea before you put it to paper, and stress test the hell out of it in your head. Put him up against something. Can he conceivably beat the bad guy? Can he not? Does he have to outthink this guy? Is he going to be able to outmuscle him? How is this guy going to be able to do the things that he's going to do? Stress test the hell out of every idea, and then commit it to paper. I think that's the best advice you can give anybody.
I think too, what you've done with Autumnville, the continuity you write in mostly, is you've taken the time to, as you call it, Bible this world. And so you don't need necessarily for a story inspiration to hit. You just know you can go visit these characters, and they're going to start maybe talking to you as you start getting into that mindset. And, that kind of gets us into what this chapter of the podcast is all about anyway, is the world building thing. So, we'll kind of leave that there, and we can go into that next. But I think that it's important, maybe not necessarily to have a world built like you've done and be prolific about it and write a ton of crap about it, but maybe it is important to, like you said, find a genre and find your Drothar the Heavysacked, your guy or your girl or whatever, and then build the scene around them.
Yeah.
And then once you have that scene, you have that character and those characters in that scene, and you can go into that world whenever you want to and write a story.
What you'll find, if you go and you look at any of the Autumnville pieces that I've written for Friday Night Writes, which you should, everyone should go and read all of my Autumnville stuff, what you'll find is that each piece is generally a one set story. I don't tend to really jump around a lot in the short fiction, but what you will find is that the first time you sit down and you develop that scene, even if it's at TK's house or if it's at a rooftop and Lowell's got to pee, or if it's in some underground crazy dungeon, what you'll find is that your mind starts to develop it. When I wrote Say Goodnight, Mr. Dowling, I was going to put it in an abandoned asylum that would be somewhere out by the lake. And when I was finished with that piece, I realized that I had written just a little throwaway line about the roads being snowed in. And I started thinking to myself, well, where does that road go? And then I started thinking, well, maybe there's a suburb close to there, because that's what it is out by the lake here. You know, you don't really have a whole lot of... There's a lot of secluded little nooks, but they're all next to something.
Yeah.
And so then I started thinking, like, yeah, well, maybe there's a neighborhood nearby, or maybe that road leads directly to this or to that. And before I had really even finished the piece, I knew in my head and my map of Autumnville where that set piece was, because I've done that several times, or I had done it several times up to that point, where I had developed a little set piece here, a little set piece there, and so I knew each one of those locales. And as you keep doing that, whether you realize it or not, you're Bibling, you're developing your city, your countryside, or whatever it is that you're using. You're developing it, you're fleshing it out, and you're making it more cohesive in your own mind. You're able to kind of map it out, and then it makes it so much easier the next time you sit down and you say, well, I want to write a story that's like, you know, that opening scene of Blade, where they walk into that underground club that's like a gigantic shower, and there's all kinds of people bouncing around, and that annoying song is playing, and it just you know, I want to write a scene like that. Well, where can I put something like that? Okay, well, I need a big building, you know, da-da-da-da. Okay, cool. Then your brain just immediately develops that area for you. Says, okay, well, you know, I want to put under a meatpacking plant. Well, okay, cool. Well, do we have a meatpacking plant here? No, not really. But we've got big buildings. We've got old buildings on the east side and north side. So, yeah, okay, I'll figure something out. And next thing you know, boom, you've got a location. And you're developing, you know.
Right. Well, I think that's going to move us right into world building. So, Fuzz, why don't you tell us about world building?
Alrighty, so World Building 101. For me, when I first got started world building, went back to tabletop role-playing days, you know, of yore, when, you know, I was like 13, and I'd gotten the first set of, I think it was Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, the red box set. I think that was AD&D. It might have just been regular D&D. And then years later, there was a book that came out by Kevin Sembedia, I think is how you pronounce it, called Heroes Unlimited. And then there was Villains Unlimited, and that was really my shit right there, like superhero stuff. And I started.
Was that like a GURPS, or was that?
No, it was the Palladium system.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, the one that's just, that guy was prolific as hell throughout the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
And when I got my hands on that, and I kind of realized that you could create your own superheroes, that was when I kind of lost my mind with world building, and I started building my first city that we still use for tabletop role playing, the Millennium Station. Mm-hmm. And I mean, and obviously in the early days, the stories sucked, the plot lines sucked. You know, the characters were really one-sided. They were really super limited. Everything was derivative, you know, because that's the process. That's how, you know, people will tell you that, you know, they're just not creative, that they just don't have that in their head, and that's horseshit. Yeah. You know, creativity is just, it's a skill. You know, it's something that you learn, no different than, you know, learning to ride a bike, drive a car, write your name. You know, it's just repetition. That's all it is. You know, it's seeing what other people are doing, and then just putting your own spin on it. And eventually, you get to a point where you've developed something that was originally a ripoff of something else, but you've developed it to the point where it's your own idea. It's so rare that you'll actually find someone who sits down and single-handedly reinvents a genre in a way that's never been seen, never been done. I can't think of someone who's done that except for maybe Lovecraft. Like, I think H.P. Lovecraft was one of the few who actually did that, but I can't think of anyone else.
And that's a part of the people who claim that they're not creative. That's one of the issues is, well, I really want to write this cyberpunky book, but it sounds exactly like a William Gibson story.
Right.
And then you're like, that's because William Gibson was really, really good at that.
Yeah.
Really good at it.
Yeah.
So you're inspired by that.
Yeah.
All you got to do is
nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
And that's the thing a lot of people don't understand is that your first story, chances are nobody's ever going to see it. And that's the beauty of a great first story is that you sit there and you write it and you pour your heart and your soul into it, and when you're done you put it away for a couple weeks, a month, a year, whatever it is. You come back to it, you reread it, and you laugh and go, man, this is terrible.
Yeah.
And at the time I thought that I was doing my best David Foster Wallace, like I wanted to write a 10,000 page book with 500,000 footnotes, and man, I thought I was genius, and now I'm reading this and I'm going, God, I suck. And that's what I love. Like, one of my first stories that I ever wrote was called Metachain 242, and it was set in a sort of science fiction-y kind of world, kind of steampunk slash kind of just general sci-fi. And I wrote that story. I remember I wrote it in my car by hand in a notebook. And by the time I was done, I thought that I had written the next greatest American novel. And then somehow I lost it. And a couple years later, when I'd come home from Florida, because I had written it in Florida, and I'd come home, and it was a night after we had where I was teaching all of the Midwesterners the Sambuca drinking thing, and I found the notebook, and I went through and I reread it, and I was like, God, this is garbage. But there was a couple little nuggets of awesome in there, and and still to this day, I have that story in my head as a way of kind of saying to myself, like, someday you're going to go back to that and you're going to do that right, because the first draft was so worth doing, just as that first baby step where I fell flat on my face, and I never realized it. I thought that, well, I wrote this by hand in a car, sitting in the driver's seat, listening to American Pie over and over and over again from like 11 o'clock at night to like 5 o'clock in the morning for like 3-4 weeks straight. I just wrote every day. And now I look back at that and I go, yeah, this is crap, but it's so cool to go back and see that sort of infant picture of you as a writer and go, here's my headspace. This is what I was going through at the time. This is what I recognized out of that. And in the interim, the 20 years or so that it's been since then, the best way for me is, first of all, to get a notebook. One of these, I don't know what the approximate size of these things are. Maybe 5 by 8 notebooks, and get a really nice pen. Just I like to buy those foo-foo gel ones that you see all the girls with. I don't know what it is about those gel pens, but man, they write so easy. There's no dicking around with them. And once some people they need the computer, and I don't discount that. I think that's fine. But for me, having a notebook and sitting there and writing it down by hand helps me to really, like I'm chiseling it in rock.
There's some science to that.
No.
Something about the activity makes your memory, your brain remembers the activity of doing it, so it remembers the thoughts in that time of doing it more when you are doing the physical act of writing than when you're typing. There is science behind it. I've read it before. I just, like everything else, I forgot it.
Yeah.
Maybe if I had written
it
the
down,
article.
yeah, you'd know. Yeah. And once I've got my notebook, I've got a fresh one right here. I got another fresh one right here. And then I've got drawing books all over the place for visual ideas. And once I've got a new idea, I like to sit on it for a couple of months and just sort of invent and just spitball ideas and stress test ideas. It's one of the things that I've kind of learned, especially in the last, maybe 10, 15 years, since the rise of Harry Potter, is that there's a style of writing that will allow you to get away with murder. And that was those Harry Potter books. Like every book, there seemed to be some seemingly random device or object that those kids would get their hands on that would allow them to achieve exactly what they needed to achieve in that episode of the story. Whether it be some weird time traveling device or, pools that let you see into the past or the future or whatever it is. Why the hell isn't everyone using that? Why isn't everyone getting those things and saying, yeah, I'm going to do something with this?
Right.
Tell with these kids, why the hell they get to play with it and I don't? Those things would cause just disasters, all over the planet.
Yeah.
But somehow in the context of those books, it makes sense because you're already suspending so much disbelief that it's easy to also suspend a bit of rationality as far as the plot and the characters and the story is concerned. And that's fine. But for me personally, I'm not a huge fan of that. And so I like to stress test everything. If there's a device or some kind of powerful object that's in a story, if it's magic or science or whatever it is, my first kind of concern is what happens, what happened to the guy who had it before my guy gets his hands on it? What did he do with it?
What's the history of it?
Yeah, where did this thing come from? Who built it? Why was it built? And most importantly, if it's something powerful, if it's something that does something crazy, why in the hell didn't someone run rampant with the thing?
Right.
And then the next guy picked it up and said, yeah, not in my house. Right. And it got slapped away and destroyed, because that's the rational thing to do with something like that.
And it almost fits into that Chekhov's gun thing. You don't bring a gun on stage unless you intend to use it.
Yeah.
Well, if you're bringing this object in and you're using it, doesn't it need to have a purpose? And doesn't that purpose need to have some kind of history? Because if it's that big of a deal, if it's something you've brought on stage to use, and it's going to be, whatever it is, if it's the smoking gun, the smoking gun doesn't necessarily have to have a history, but we need to know how it got there, or where it came from.
Yeah.
Or why the person who's got the gun has it in the first place.
Yeah, and why, most importantly, he hasn't killed everyone that's gotten up to that point.
Right.
If it's a device that will let you get away with literal murder, why in the hell haven't you gotten away with literal murder over and over and over again.
Right.
You know, and that's the thing that bugs me about some stuff. And I'm not trying to talk trash about Harry Potter. God knows that series is sold more than I'll ever be able to sell of anything in my life.
Right.
You know, but it's a part of that style of storytelling that for me doesn't fly. You know, there's no jazz in that for me. I don't dig that. So I like to stress test a lot of the stuff that I bring into my storylines. I also like to stress test my character concepts. So, like, I have a character in my story called the Scarecrow, and he is an extremely powerful being that serves a very specific purpose. And at a certain point, he denies that purpose. And because of that, it has massive repercussions. And the characters are now living in those repercussions. They don't realize it. They have no idea that it's because of this event that they're now in the current predicament that they're in. And I don't even really think the Scarecrow even knows that that's the case. I mean, I think he has a vague idea of that. But, you know, when I was developing the Scarecrow, because when I first developed the character, he was kind of an anagram of a Batman style character, and he grew into something very large and very supernatural over the years. He sort of developed well away from his original origins. But when I was a teenager, I heard the song by Ministry called Scarecrow. And it's like a 9-minute long song, but there's only like 4 lines of lyrics in it. But each one of those lines of lyrics, I was able to sort of visualize my character doing those things. And it really heavily influenced everything about him, even to this day. And so what I knew was that I had this massive, almost mythological thing that was out of a bygone era of when you could have something powerful and maybe even a bit magical, something just raw, supernatural, that's 20 foot tall, that's rampaging, you know, across the countryside or through a town. And, you know, there's green fire in its wake and you know, and all this stuff. So, like a dragon attacking a town today, you know, like that's almost what he would be like. And I sort of stress tested that and kept coming up with, no, this isn't going to work. Like, he doesn't work. And, you know, and it killed me. I mean, like it killed my soul a little bit because he's such a important character for me, and I love to showcase him, you know, and just that almost near omnipotent power that character had of just being able to be this whatever he needed to be to suit the situation. And you know, as I stress tested the hell out of it, it just didn't work. Every time I would commit him to paper doing some of these incredible things, he just didn't fit in the world anymore. You know, it was like, you know, if you were reading, say, a Daredevil comic, and then all of a sudden Superman flies in, you go, okay, well, problem solved. This Daredevil guy ain't shit compared to the guy in the cape.
Right.
You know, the guy in the cape's going to fix everything before he can even think about it. And it was the same thing, was just whatever the problem was, well, the problem's over. You know? Like, why wouldn't this character just fix this problem? And so once I kept stress testing each kind of character to kind of figure out what his place would be and what's the far end of the scale and what's the short end of the scale and how do I find a happy medium in there? What I decided to do was to kind of I broke everything down into 4 parts that I use. I use genre or theme, and then people, places, and things. It seems obvious, and it is. If you're going to world build, those 4 things are the easiest things to use to world build. Your genre, people, places, and things. Everything falls into those, and because that's super easy. You can write it down on a piece of paper. You can write down genre, and you say to yourself, well, I feel like writing something cyberpunk. Okay, cool. Write down cyberpunk. But chances are it's not going to be raw, original cyberpunk. It's going to be something with your touch to it. So give that some thought. Once you've written down the word cyberpunk, don't just commit to cyberpunk. Give it some thought. Think about the world. Now that you know that it's cyberpunk, what does the world look like? Does every city look like, it's out of Blade Runner? Does every, if you're going to write supernatural fiction, does it look like every city is out of The Crow? How not necessarily the construction of the world, but what is the feeling of it? What are you getting out of that? Because that's really what the genre is supposed to do, is to give you that, if you look at a book and it's a steampunk book, you're not looking for vampires and werewolves and spooky stuff. You're looking for high-flying adventure with jetpacks and giant ships that are, galleons with balloons that are carrying them through the air, and everyone wears goggles for some reason.
Sounds like a Miyazaki film.
Yeah, you're looking for very specific things. And so what you're going to do is you're going to serve the needs of that genre, but you're also going to put your own flavor in. And once you've done that, then you can go through and you can say to yourself, well, what are the people? Now I got my genre. That kind of gives you the mood of your world. And once you've got that, you can kind of say to yourself, okay, well, now what are my people? And then develop your A cast. First, your hero and your villain, because they're the 2 most important people. The most important of the 2 is always the villain. I mean, think back to, say, your top 5 favorite villains in anything ever. For me, the number 1 villain is always Star from the Preacher series. That character went through hell.
Yeah.
And when I think of a great villain, I think of that guy because he was just a dude. Yeah, he had access to all kinds of amazing things, but he himself was just a dude, and he was so flawed that every time he was on panel, you knew something ridiculously funny or cool or awesome was about to happen. And that's what you need out of your bad guy. Your bad guy has got to be able to walk on screen and just instantaneously blow everyone away. And that's so hard. That's so hard.
And for me, that's the Joker.
Yeah.
That is number 1 in my book. And what you just said, I mean, think about every incarnation of the Joker you've seen. Even the campy stuff, he still grabs your attention.
Yeah.
Every time he's on screen.
Yeah.
Or in a panel or whatever.
Absolutely. And, when you're developing that villain, there's a whole process to developing characters, and we can get to that in another podcast. But the important thing is that you want to, because you'll probably know your hero before you even really start worrying about the story. You'll have an idea who he or she may be, and generally they tend to kind of come from humble origins, because if you're using the hero's journey, which you probably should, then it almost demands that they come from humble beginnings, and then they grow to, being some ungodly, powerful, super badass.
And we're talking about, I mean, this may be an American thing, I don't know, but that everyman character, that common folk character, is the easiest way to get your audience to root for somebody. It is the absolute most tried and true, easiest way to do that.
Yeah. I think for one of the things about The Matrix, I'm a huge Matrix fan. I love all the movies, but one of the things about the Neo character that's so appealing to me is the fact that when he was just Thomas Anderson, they picked. I mean, Keanu Reeves is not necessarily known for being the most emotive actor, and a lot of people accuse him of being very wooden. And I think that really served that character so well, because he was such a sort of blank slate in a lot of ways, that you were able to easily project yourself into his position and imagine yourself in that car ride surrounded by the rebels, where, pull your shirt up, and then pull out some crazy device, I would be like, no, not with that thing in this car,
right.
So, it was easy to sympathize with him. And that's kind of important when you're developing a character for any big story. For short fiction, it's a whole different animal. Short fiction, you expect to sort of get you expect a bum rush of information in the early stages of kind of development situation, boom, done. And that's how it works.
Yeah, or you're jumping into the hero's journey mid-journey.
Yeah, you're getting a scene out of the hero's journey as opposed to the whole story.
Right.
So, but when you're developing that initial stuff, you start with that hero, you start with that villain, and no matter how cool your hero may be, you make that villain 10 times cooler. No matter that bad guy, give him cool super technology or cool magic or whatever it may be, tons of badass henchmen, whatever it is that he needs to be the villain that you desperately need him to be. And that's the great part about it, is that in the early stages of development, you can swing for the fences every single time when you're developing your characters, because you're gonna start paring them back. There's nothing wrong with overdoing it in the beginning and then saying to yourself, well, this is a little too much. My guy can't reasonably overcome any of this, so I gotta pare this bad guy back a bit. And that's all part of the process. Once you develop that that hero and villain dynamic, that will inform so much of your story, because your villain is going to be probably in his own area, and you're going to build his citadel or his country or his space station or whatever it is to suit his needs. And that in and of itself is such an easy part of the development process. Because once you go, I'm going to have this super badass guy, and now I'm going to put him in a space station. Well, what do I need in the space station? Well, he's super evil. So he's going to have cool spaceships that have tons of laser beams. He's going to have, all kinds of torturous devices. He's going to, it's not going to be, you walk in, there's a dormitory, here's a little area for snacks and goodies, and there's a barista over here for coffee. It's going to be dark and brooding and super cool. And then when you're developing your hero, you're going to automatically kind of make him the bare opposite of what that villain is. So if he's super lavish and erudite and crazy well educated and all this stuff, your hero almost by definition has to be a kind of bare bones Spartan living, kind of country bumpkin, doesn't really necessarily know too much about anything other than the stuff that he knows, the stuff that gets him by in life. And that's when that's where you find really good conflict between those two. And then once you've developed that, then you want to develop his mentor, his best friend, the girl that he's in love with, the girl that he's going to end up being in love with, and probably a Judas-style betrayer character. Someone that is going to be his homie in the beginning and is going to turn on him later. And you might not use half of those characters, but it's always good to develop them. Get it in your head what each one of these characters is for. What does this mentor do? Why is he the character's mentor? If you're using the hero's journey, you know that the hero needs the mentor to propel him into the story. The mentor is the one who's going to hand over that lightsaber and teach him how to, swing it around without cutting his own leg off.
Right.
And, that's important. So you have to develop this guy into a character that the audience is instantaneously going to either adore or love to hate. If he's a dick, then make him a dick. If he is like an Obi-Wan, who is like a protector and a good force in the guy's life, then make him that stereotype, especially in the early days. Make the characters as stereotypical as you need them to be to suit the purposes of what you're doing. You develop the love interest, you develop the girl that he's with, the girl that he's going to be with, you develop the Judas, betrayer style character. And then once you've got that A cast done, you develop your B cast, which is going to be essentially any character that's going to be, if you think of it in the like a solar system, your main cast are the planets, your plot is the sun, and your main characters are the planets, and each planet has a moon, and this B cast is going to be the moons of all these different worlds. So each character that you create, so the mentor is going to have at least one or two guys that he's going to either respect or turn to in times of need. So you're going to develop that. Your love interest, she's going to have, or she or he is going to have a couple of characters that surround them. And those are going to be confidants or what have you. And then when you get to the Judas character is probably going to need some service-related stuff, things to get things done. And he's probably going to be connected to the villain in some way. Or become connected to the villain in some way. And once you've got that kind of basic dynamic written down, and all you have to do is just start at the top, your main character, then take 2 inches on the paper and write the villain, and then underneath that character, a cast, and then boom, write down those names, whatever they are. And if you're bad with names, a lot of people are, get on the net, look up, cool baby names, and you'll find it, and then boom, go through and my guy's named Dash Rendar. Hey, cool, whatever. And once you've done that, give your characters the names that you want. A lot of people will give characters names that sort of suit their purpose, which I'm not a huge fan of, but, I've kind of done that in Autumnville. I mean, my main character is named Mercy, and that's kind of intrinsic to her character. But once you've got that main cast done, then it's important to kind of take a step back and start looking at the kind of the inspiration behind the story. You've got your characters, and that's a good thing. You've got their names. You probably got a little bit of backstory to them, and that's cool. But then you want to take a step back and you want to maybe start asking yourself questions like, what's this story for? Where does the story, why why this story? And that's information that the reader's never gonna see. They're never gonna know unless you tell them. But it's important to help kind of cement the idea in your head. I know for myself, when I was developing Autumnville, I referenced Garrison Keillor, Prairie Home Companion, and I was really kind of obsessed with the idea that we don't have, as Americans, we don't have a long enough history where we have mythology that's intrinsic to our land. I mean, we don't pay attention to native stuff.
Right.
And so because of that, we've got Paul Bunyan, Paul Revere, we got those guys, but they're only 200 years old or so. And none of them are godlike in stature.
And in that same vein, specifically Paul Revere, that's a historical figure.
Yeah.
He's not a mythic figure, but the tale of his ride and all of that has become mythical.
Yeah.
It's now greater than what it ever was.
Yeah.
And
in a lot of ways that is mythology. But because we know he was a real man, no matter what amazing things that we might attribute to him, it's also just as easy to imagine him at the bar getting drunk, hooking up with someone he wasn't supposed to.
Right.
It's just as easy to imagine him being a man as being something bigger.
Right.
And because of that, we don't have the mythology of, say, Russia or Greece or Rome or any of those kinds of things that go back stupid far into history. And because of that, when I was developing Autumnville, one of the things that I really wanted to do was to sort of create a Midwestern mythology centered around some of the supernatural that's there. And the Scarecrow is kind of intrinsic to that Midwestern mythology, just visually speaking, because we grow up in the Midwest, we're used to corn being everywhere.
We're surrounded by it.
Yeah, and we're used to scarecrows. We're used to all that kind of stuff, and so that's iconography that we can instantly kind of grab hold of, and that was kind of important to me. And I really kind of probably overdeveloped that stuff before I really started to commit to anything. But once I developed, I had my people, I had my genre, my people, now I needed my places. And so once I created Autumnville as a city, I knew that I wanted it to be a sister city of our own hometown. And I was just going to essentially populate it with the people that I know and the people that I grew up with and all that kind of stuff. And so it was easy to sort of mimic, or not mimic, but sort of copy what we already had and twist it around and turn it into Autumnville. For other projects, though, that are more, more creative, I guess, where you're literally creating your own cities or you're developing your own worlds, for those, it should just be just as simple. Once you've got the people and your genre figured out, that's already going to inform a lot about the world. And a lot of people will tell you things like, well, it's important that you create your own monetary system. And how do the banks work? And how does the subway in your world work? Is it backwards from the real, And they throw out this idea of minutia at you. And for me, that it's cool to know, But unless you're planning on sitting down and writing out half a chapter where you're going to explain the ins and outs of your economic system, then all you really got to know is that, yeah, there's money, and, you know, there are people who handle money, and there are people who have a lot, and there are people who have a little. You don't need to really necessarily know much more than that, because that's kind of how it is in the real world. You know, there are a lot of people that will try and get you to overdevelop, and that's fine if that's what you're into. It's not for me. Like, when I'm developing worlds, I'm not concerned about denominations of cash or what have you. I'm not concerned about weather patterns. I'm not concerned about, you know, climate change and all kinds of that kind of, you know, like, that's just, if I need it in the story, then yeah, it'll be there. And once it is, I'll try and give it some thought. But I'm not gonna break my back in the early stages trying to do that. I want to do the cool shit first. Yeah. That's what I'm hyped about, is doing the cool stuff. And then once I got the cool stuff done, usually all the little things tend to kind of fall into place. So once you're developing your places, if you're already thinking about the story, which chances are you are, then you're developing set pieces. You know, I want a scene in an old spooky train yard. Okay, cool. Develop that train yard. And then I want to do another scene in a Walmart. Okay, that's weird, but go ahead. You know, and you know, and you'll develop those set pieces as they need to be developed. You're not necessarily going to sit there and, you know, be Tolkien and map out your entire world, or at least a huge chunk of it, and, you know how many miles it is to go from Mordor to Gondor, and from another place that ends in Or, and, you know, all this other stuff. Yeah, to hell with that. You know, have fun with it. If that's how you have fun with it, then do it. But if you're not into it, then don't feel like you gotta. You know, just come up with some ideas and set pieces.
And there again, though, if your story is going to take you, you know, for, you know, the Lord of the Rings, they're traveling all that distance.
Yeah.
So it was important that he had that down.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes and no.
Well,
I mean, you can argue that.
Sure, but knowing not necessarily not knowing the distances, that's not as important. But knowing the relationship between all of them, and since the story is a journey, then knowing what you're going to pass through. Here's the lay of the land. Here's the lay of this land. Here's this swamp. Here's this and this and this.
Yeah, and that's important. That's all set pieces.
Yeah.
You know, because unless you are Tolkien, you're not going to write a whole chapter about guys walking from place to place. You know, you're gonna gloss over that. You know, and it's good to throw in stuff. You know, they pass by the spooky cave of whatever and what have you. But unless you're going to go to the spooky cave, then don't worry about the spooky cave. You know, if you're using a mythological or created political system, you know, you're going to drive yourself crazy trying to figure out the ins and outs of it. You know, you're going to spend months and months researching stuff that you don't really need to know. It would probably make you a better person knowing all that stuff. You know, there's nothing wrong with learning more about politics. But on the other hand, if you don't need it, don't worry about it. When I was developing Autumnville, and I was really going gung-ho about the original idea, once I got into my places, I knew that I wanted to create some local hotspots and places that I personally like in town. And so I created a couple of diners and gas stations and things like that, you know, I frequent, and, you know, the people there know me, so that it was easy to write, you know. Not that I wanted necessarily for it to be a lazy process, but, you know, do I want to spend half an hour or an hour developing the guy who works at the gas station, or do I want to go, no, I know the guy that works at the gas station. This is what he says to me every time I walk through the door. This is what he's going to say to my character every time he walks through the door. I think pulling on real life is one of the best ways to do anything, especially when it comes to fiction. There's an authenticity that you don't get unless you spend a hardcore amount of time developing the minutia of every single character that's going to be in your piece. And nobody has the time of day for that, you know.
And chances are that gas station attendant, somebody else who's reading it, they recognize that character because they go to a gas station that's got a similar person working there.
Yeah. And, you know, familiarity breeds, you know, a lot of understanding and just, you know, people like what they know. And that's the terrible thing about being a fiction writer, is that people don't know what they like. People like what they know. They don't know what they like. And, you know, the proof of that is in television all the time. You'll see people going, I don't want to watch that show. And then someone says, dude, watch the show. And then you take 10 minutes out of your day or half an hour out of your day and you sit down and you watch an episode of the show, and now you're hooked. You love the show. Because you don't know what you like. You only like what you know. And when you're a fiction writer, that's one of the hardest things to get around. To get someone to pick up your work and to give it a shot. To care about it. When, by all rights, they shouldn't. It's really tough. And that's, you know, that's the problem you have with anything. With whether it's Friday Night Rights or whether it's a novel or what have you. You know, if people find out about your novel and it's in their wheelhouse, they like it before they've even picked it up. They know it's in the genre that they like. They know it's all the stuff that they love. They're going to pick it up. They like it before they've even read the first word. And so when you're developing, it's important to kind of have that in mind. Now, you can try and service other people's needs, which is fine, but the best way is to find out what you love and then embrace all of that, so that while you're developing, you're doing it for yourself to make yourself happy. Everyone else is just coming along for the ride. And like I was saying earlier, there's going to be tons of people who are going to be like, yeah, I love the pretzel and the dragon thing. That's my thing. I'm super hyped. You wrote that book for me. It's the same thing that we get hyped up about music for. If you're a lyrics guy, you'll hear words in a song and you'll go, man, that's how I feel about this person, or how I feel about that thing, or that's what I'm going through right now. And instantaneously you love it. And you want to kind of keep that in mind. But once you've developed, say, your places, then you want to get into the things. And that's, you know, all the oddball doodads. That's what kind of car does your character drive? What, you know, if your character rides around on a dragon's back, does he have a sword? Is that sword super cool? Is it some piece of shit that he picked up, you know, in an alleyway somewhere? You know, all that kind of stuff. And once you've, you know, and arguably the things can be the most important stuff in your story. You just want to grab hold of those things. And if it's important for your story, then you want to develop it. Who made it? I mean, if it's a computer, you don't necessarily want to figure that out unless it's a real special computer made by a real special guy. Then, yeah, develop the hell out of that. Where did it come from? Why did he develop it? All that kind of stuff. You want it to live and breathe. And then once you've got your people, your places, and your things set up, then by that point you should be so steeped in what these characters and places and things are that the first time you sit down to put words on page, you've already run through 200, 300, 400 scenarios. You know all the stuff that's in this world. You've built it from the atoms up. And so now that you're sitting down and you're going to start developing your plot line, which chances are your world, your theme, your genre has already kind of given you. Once you've got that plot line and you've bullet pointed, or if you're using the hero's journey and you've just bullet pointed the hero's journey, then the actual act of writing becomes, you're just transcribing what's happening in these films in your head, in these stories that are already in your head. You already know everything that's happened and that's going to happen. The hard part then is just committing the time to put it on paper. Going through the drudgery of that. That's the hardest part of it. That was a little long-winded there, but when you think about developing, because I know you haven't really committed to developing, world building yet, but I know you've got some ideas. You've got that time jumper idea, and you got a couple other little doodads that are going to require a lot of world building. Like what, like, is there anything that you've picked up or anything that you feel like is going to be important for you to use down the road?
Yeah. I did a little bit of research, before we started this, just into the process of world building, because really the only thing that I had known about it was what you had told me about, your process with Autumnville, all of the stuff. I read about Tolkien and that craziness that he went through doing it. And a lot of the fantasy stuff, I know Martin did a lot for the Song of Fire and Ice books and all that stuff. But, in my main story that I've been focused on most recently, which is the Memoirs of Eli Grigsby, the amount of world building I need to do is what you started with, so people. My genre is sort of a horror genre, I guess, because there's a supernatural element to it. But, so the people's important. The places aren't all that important because it's the world we live in. It is here and now, except there's all this weird stuff. So the components that I need to build and then I need to flesh out and get to know forward and backwards are, what are the physics? What are the mechanics of the supernatural? What's out there? What exactly does this world have in it? What does it contain? And then places are just, like you said, around my hometown. Places I've been elsewhere. A lot of the Eli story is going to be a journey. He's going to be traveling the countryside, doing different things. I wrote the Pizza Bazaar. That was in a pizza place. It was a Pizza Hut. It might as well have been.
Yeah.
That's all it was. Or like a Pizza Ranch or whatever. It was just a pizza place. We've all been to one. We all know what they look like. That's what that was.
Yeah.
I guess when I first read up on this and stuff, one of my big questions was like, how important is minutia? Like currency, geography, all that stuff you already explained. Like, is that important? And then, what are some shortcuts, for the lazy world builder, I guess, if you set something in present day, like I just said, but with a supernatural element, you can just build off of the known world, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Sure.
you just go from here's the world, it's exactly as it is, except there's protector spirits and there's reapers, basically. Okay, so that's what you need to explore, not what Decatur, Illinois looks like or anything like that.
And that it smells like soy.
Yeah, exactly. I found a resource online called the worldbuildingschool.com, just worldbuildingschool.com, and it had like a real succinct framework, and it kind of, I mean, it matched, it was similar to what yours was, but you know, their main thing was, so you can use this framework, here you go. So start with the universe. Okay, so not necessarily what's the universe look like, but what are the governing mechanics of your story?
Yeah, physics, math.
Yeah,
you know, magic, all that stuff.
Yeah, how does all that stuff work? And then from there, they say the planet, or you know, if it's science fiction, then the planets. You know, what's their cosmology? What's their ecology? What's their geography? You know, tectonics, all that kind of stuff. Your map building.
There is a kind of elegance in the simplicity of doing stuff like that too, because like if you go back at some of the most successful stuff that's come out in the last 15-20 years in science fiction, just because it's the first one that comes to mind, is to think of Battlestar. And if you take the time to kind of look back at Battlestar, you know, I mean, it's a run and gun story. So they don't really take a lot of time to develop the backgrounds of, you know, all the different planets. You just know that the planets were named after constellations for us, and that they were sort of stereotypical people in each place, you know, so that if somebody said that they were from X world, you could kind of assume, okay, that all the people from this world are kind of that way. They didn't really kind of overdo it, because the process of the story was going to develop the characters, and they knew that kind of going into it. Now, they may have overdeveloped, you know, everything before they even got into it, but as far as for the purpose of the storytelling was concerned, they didn't really dig into it, you know. And that was one of the things that was really kind of cool about it, so that by the time the Caprica series came out, and if you were a fan of it, which it took me a while to fall into that story, but once I did, I was like, oh my god, why did they stop making this show? You were kind of blown away by the minutia, because they had taken the time to make it so real that it was mind-boggling, you know, and it was so cool how they put everything together. You know, so I kind of agree with that. You know, like, the minutia is important, but I think it's more important for the author than it is for the audience.
Yeah. And I think that's a lot of the point, and a lot of the research I did, a lot of the stuff I found. You know, the last part of their framework is the people. So then you describe cultures, politics, economics.
Yeah.
That's your world.
Yeah.
And then the website's pretty cool, like, especially if you're doing fantasy or sci-fi. They get a lot of map making type stuff.
Yeah.
And then my standby is Chuck Wendig. His Terrible Minds blog, terribleminds.com. I read it every day, just for the reading, you know, or just for the writing tips and everything.
Yeah.
He had a post from 2 years ago, 25 things you should know about world building, and it's pretty immersive. But some of the ones that I highlighted were, you know, he said, you know, at times it's okay to just give the audience just what they need to know.
Yeah.
So it goes back to the example you had about the spooky cave. If you got a spooky cave, you need to use the spooky cave.
Yeah.
If you're not going to use it, then it doesn't need to be on the set. You know, it does not need to be a part of the story necessarily.
Yeah, I agree.
And another thing, he talked about, I'm lazy. He's like, develop your world as you go. It requires more work on the back end.
Yeah,
but
a lot.
Yeah, if you develop the minutia as you go in, then you can better serve the story you're telling rather than the story serving the world you're building.
Essentially, the difference is that if you're willing to put in the effort in the early days, and you develop, and then you get to the point where you're overdeveloping, then you can pare back. You can shave off the stuff that you don't need in favor of the stuff that works. And that, for me, is really important. I like the adage of, if you prepare for tomorrow, today takes care of itself. And that, especially in writing, it's kind of important that, there are always going to be successful people who write by the seat of their pants. And that's fine. But if you're developing a world, you're developing a concept and a story that's really uniquely your own. Even if you're developing it off the backs of giants, and you're developing a story that takes place in a galaxy far, far away with guys with laser swords and all kinds of stuff, the process of developing it is going to make it your own. It's going to cause the changes that it's going to need to not be Star Wars, to not be The Matrix, to not be Twilight or Harry Potter. It's going to be uniquely your own through the process of developing. And if you're willing to take the month or the year that it might take you to develop, to prep and develop your world beforehand, I believe that you'll get more satisfaction out of the final product than if you just kind of say, well, I'm going to do what I need now, and then later on, when it's time to start answering questions and it's time to start making sense of things, that now you've got to go back and you've got to reread, you've got to rely on beta readers, you've got to rely on people outside of yourself to kind of help make sense of your own continuity. I think you're kind of hamstringing yourself in the long run. But you're talking to a guy who, like I showed you earlier, I wrote a whole chapter in my notebook that was pre-Big Bang. So I developed before the universe existed. Here's what happened, and then I developed from that point to the modern day. That's stupid. There's no reason to do that. There's no one is ever going to read that except for me and go, oh, that's cool. That makes perfect sense. It's never going to make it in the story. It's never going to be a pivotal part of the story that needs to be told. But having that information for me informs hundreds of other decisions that I'm going to make down the road. Like you were talking about with that site, it informs the physics of my world.
Right.
And that's super important.
Yeah. The other thing I found was a good example of something that's going to be maybe a little counter to what we're saying, but there's an io9.com article called "Does the Phantom Menace Have Better World Building Than A New Hope?" Obviously, the two Star Wars films.
Yeah.
And the point is that Episode 1 has a much more defined world. All of that further definition creates way more exposition, and it causes the remainder of the story to suffer in a way, basically. I said it halts interesting parts of the action and dialogue by dumping just buckets full of trade route turds on us, the whole journey through. So we just keep hearing about trade routes and all this stuff. Episode 4, conversely, mostly just tells us that we're entering into a universe that is encompassed in civil war. Mm-hmm. And it leaves it at that. And then it tells us about the world through dialogue and action.
Yeah.
Not through the scrawling thing at the beginning.
I agree. I take some issue with that just from... I'm not afraid to say it. I'm a fan of the episode 1, 2, and 3. I think that they're fantastic. I'm not a Jar Jar fan, but that seems to be the primary issue with the first 3 films. But as far as a world building exercise goes, when you look at New Hope, the charm and the excitement about it was that it was something that we had never seen before. Mos Eisley, the Death Star, all those things, the Millennium Falcon, all that stuff. We had never been in a spaceship like the Millennium Falcon before. Up until that point, most spaceships were rockets that pointed upward and shot up into the space, or floated downward with their ass coming down towards the dirt. The story, the world building was spot on for what it needed, but the problem with it was that for the whole of the 3 films, it was also a very claustrophobic world-building process.
Because it wasn't as expansive.
Yeah, because how many set pieces did you get? You got Dagobah, you got Tatooine, you had some spaceships.
The Death Star.
Yeah, you had the Death Star. But you didn't go to Coruscant, you didn't go to Corellia, you didn't go to, Mustafar. You didn't go to Geonosis. You didn't go to any of those other things. So what you had was a story that had no choice but be focused on that kind of... Do you remember the Clerks cartoon? Mm-hmm. You remember the last episode? Mm-hmm. With the circus that's going on outside and they're inside? And Jay and Silent Bob are running in, and they're like, "Oh my God, there's a monkey, and there's blah blah blah, and it's girls kissing." And that's what the original trilogy was. Look at all this crazy stuff going around us. We're not going to show you, but we are going to talk about it briefly, in such a way that's going to make you go, "Oh man, this place is huge. This is so incredible. They've done so much work. They've created this great, huge, monumental world, But they didn't have the cash money to pull that off. So they lied to you. And they made you love them for it. And that's part of the genius of the original trilogy. Is that when you take a look at it, now especially, it doesn't hold up. You love the characters. Because we grew up with them. We have no choice but to love them. They were our superheroes when we were kids. We grew up, we had the toys, all that stuff. But when you look at the new trilogy, the episodes 1, 2, and 3, you had a guy who had more money than God, who said, "You know what? I've got the opportunity. I'm going to show you Naboo. I'm going to show you the Gungan underwater city. I'm going to show you a lava world. I'm going to show you, the Jedi home base, and even if you have problems with the episodes 1, 2, and 3, which I know tons of people do, nerds go bonkers, they hate it because the internet says that they have to hate it. And that's fine. But as a world building idea, man, not just episode 1, but episode 1, 2, and 3, incredible world building. Did it serve the purpose? Well, there was some stuff about the trade route stuff. But even in the article that you're talking about, if they're referencing it in the same way that you do, I think that they're remembering it through shit-colored lenses.
Well, that may be.
Because when I think back to the storyline, what I recall, the scroll comes down talking about the trade routes and all this other stuff. But as a story, all I recall was that gave me what I needed to know to understand that we have 2 Jedi walking into a bad situation. And then almost instantaneously we see those Jedi do shit that we've never seen Jedi do before. And then instantaneously you go, man, Luke was a shit Jedi. He couldn't run at super speed. And you're going, man.
I think a lot of the point is that what you said, all of the different set pieces, all of the places that he took us in those 3 movies it was almost like a sightseeing tour that he was saying, look at all this shit I can do now.
Yeah.
And that there is fine. Mm-hmm. But in the original trilogy, you didn't need to go to all those places because they weren't important.
Yeah.
And I think that's the point. The argument is that the original trilogy had the better story. That's the argument. And we could probably argue that forever because I believe that the original story and episode 2 and 3 are the same story.
Yeah.
The original trilogy is Luke's journey to Jedi. Episode 2 and 3 are Anakin's journey to Jedi, and episode 1 is just flashy stuff that didn't mirror the original trilogy at all.
Yeah. But do you think that it's important that the original trilogy mirrors the second trilogy, or the original? I should say that you know what I mean. Episode 1, 2, and 3 mirrors episode 4.
Is it important? I think it's important because that was the point, at least as I perceived it. Mm-hmm. That was the point of it, was to show you originally saw the Jedi who could have gone to the dark side, but he didn't. Mm-hmm. He followed the path, became a Jedi, and then went to the light side. And then you saw what happens when you follow the path and then you go to the dark side.
Yeah.
You already kind of knew what the outcome was going to be, obviously. But to me, it is important because that was the story. I think that was the point that was being made.
Yeah.
That was what they were trying to do, was show Anakin and Luke are the same. They had the same journey. Mm-hmm. One just ended up way worse than the other.
See, the only real problem that I have with the world building and the storyline of episodes 1, 2, and 3 is that it ruins the payoff of the Luke, I'm your father moment.
Yeah.
And I wish that there was some way they could have gotten around that, although I find it hard to really imagine there being a way to do that.
Well, and this is off topic, but I read an article, because I got kids.
Yeah.
And there's new movies coming out, and I'm excited, and now, I have to go see all the superhero movies with Sydney. Mm-hmm. I want her to go see Star Wars with me, so I want to get her involved. Well, I read this article that said, hey, here's the order you should watch the Star Wars films. Mm-hmm. And it says watch episode 4, then episode 5, and then once their mind explodes that Vader is his dad, which we've taken for granted at this point. Because when we were kids, though, that was new. That was not that was not a trope at that time. So you watch episode 4 and 5, and then you go and you watch, if you want to, episode 1, 2, and 3. You see him become Vader, and then you finish it off with Jedi. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's a genius.
Yeah, that's smart.
Genius order to watch.
That's smart. Yeah, because if you look, and I know we're going way off with this, but the thing is that if you look at episodes 1, 2, and 3, and you say to yourself, well, the part of the beauty of episodes 4, 5, and 6 was that they didn't need to show you all this stuff. I don't necessarily agree that it was a sightseeing tour as much as it was. It's called Star Wars for a reason.
Yeah.
And there were, in the original trilogy, there was very little war. There was very little stars. And in episodes 1, 2, and 3, what you get out of that is that, there's a lot at stake in what's going on. And that there's only 10,000 or so of these Jedi who are dropping like flies. And that they're sort of expected to fix everything. And that there's a lot of pressure on these guys to not just be better than everyone, but to be paragons. And to really, one Jedi runs a huge regiment of clone soldiers, and and you start to kind of realize the size and the scope of what's at stake, and it does boil down to that trade federation versus this and that, but that mirrors so much in real life that I think denying that is kind of intellectually dishonest. I think that, I have no problem with people hating on episodes 1, 2, and 3. There's a lot of reasons to hate episodes 1, 2, and 3. But, when you hear people talking about it, and you're a writer, it does kind of crush your soul a little bit to hear people getting angry that this guy who gave us one of the greatest things from our childhood, who then came back and outdid himself by building even bigger sets and even more incredible things to happen, getting shit on by people who've never written a goddamn thing in their life. They've never created anything in their goddamn life. They've never worked on an idea, or if they have, they've never worked it to fruition.
Seen it through.
They've not finished it. They don't know what it's like to put your heart and soul into something and then honestly believe that you've created something that's worthwhile, and then to watch people demolish it based on really frivolous things, that don't really hurt the storyline. Like, if you don't like Jar Jar, he's annoying, but is he worth hating the whole trilogy over? No. The trade route stuff, the whole weird thing where the weird green people all spoke like they were Chinese, that in retrospect, probably insensitive a little bit, but is it worth hating the whole trilogy over? No.
It's like anything. It's like, we're in the midst of just all kinds of, with the superhero genre that's gone crazy. The hate goes too far on everything.
Yeah.
Because, one of the nice things about the internet, I in my opinion, is that, people are allowed to be critics, even if they've never done anything like what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And that's a part of the marketplace of ideas, basically. Everybody gets to voice their opinion, and that's good. But with that comes that internet gang up, that pile on that happens all the time.
Yeah.
Where the hate goes too far.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't care for episode 1 and 2.
No.
I love episode 3. I don't care for episode 1 and 2. But in the grand scheme of things, I'm glad that they exist.
Yeah.
Because having the original trilogy was awesome. And then getting to see how one of the best villains of all time, how he came to be, awesome.
Yeah.
Like, that's, what more could you ask for, you know? But, again, we can digress because we're way off
But,
the
you know,
topic,
it does kind of, though, come into the world building thing, is because, you know, when you're building a world, you know, you can approach it from a lot of different angles. And, you know, approaching it from that, say, episode 1, 2, and 3 angle of saying, you know, this blank paper that I'm looking at, this blank page that I'm about to type on, this literally represents anything that I want to do. And I can do it on here. Or 4, 5, and 6, where you say, I can do anything, but I'm going to close it up a little bit. I can't afford to put too much into that. And I'm, you know, and I'm okay with either one. I think that either one is fine. But if I were on that page and it said, which is better world building? Well, hands down, episode 1, better world building, as far as better progression through the story. Episode 4, hands down. But what you're looking at there is not skill of storytelling. What you're looking at is skill in how much money they had to play with. You know, and you take a look, if you watched any of the old stuff about when they were in Tunisia, they were like rained out, then they were sandstormed out. You know, they were the place was wrecked time and time again. What you saw there was an economy of story and being a penny pincher of words, you know, and concepts and ideas that you could put on screen, because he wasn't George Lucas then.
Right.
You know, he was just some schmuck who made a car movie with Opie in it.
Yeah.
You know, and, you know, by the time he came around again to do episode 1, he was the George Lucas. And our expectations were so great that no matter what we got, it was never going to be enough.
Right.
You know?
I think ultimately...
And as a writer, you will encounter that.
For sure.
Because if you write something incredible for your first outing, everyone's going to expect you to outdo yourself.
Right.
And that might not be what your story demands. Your story might demand something a little more subtle or a little more personal. And you might give it to them, and they might, you know, say, yeah, you suck.
Yeah.
You know, you never know.
M. Night Shyamalan.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you know, the point is, if you think that the episode 1, 2, and 3 and episode 4, 5, and 6 are equal stories, then you can get away with doing much less world building and still tell a great story.
Yeah, that's very true.
And I think that's kind of the moral of the story, maybe.
I think, because what you got out of 4, 5, and 6 was a lot of really kind of authentic character out of what you had. You know, you had a real sassy kind of, you know, badass, self-reliant female lead. You had a real kind of cool, tough guy lead, and then you had this kind of young, kind of bright-eyed and bushy-tailed kind of guy. And, you know, you had really great characters that were really easy to grab a hold of, because they were archetypes. They weren't necessarily characters. They were archetypes. And you were able to easily grab a hold of them, and you were easily able to sympathize, because everyone wanted to be like Han, but everyone also wanted to have the lightsaber and the powers like Luke, you know? And so you were, as kids, you were easily able to grab a hold of them. And I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of the people of our generation had so much trouble with 1, 2, and 3, was because we had already grown up. and we weren't grasping for characters to sort of, believe in
right
at that point. And so what we got out of episodes 1, 2, and 3 was spectacle, and a lot of flash, and not a lot of substance. And I think if you go back critically and you look at 1, 2, and 3, there's a hell of a lot of substance there. You just choose not to kind of embrace it because you're a little too old for it.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why when you do see young people and you show them the Clone Wars cartoons and all that stuff, they go bananas over that stuff.
Yeah.
And then you show them episodes 3, 4, 5, and 6, and you're like, here's the deal, and then they sit down and they're asleep in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And you're like,
why isn't anybody flipping around or anything?
Yeah, they're like, well, why isn't there 400 lightsabers going off right now?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just a difference in the generations, but
yeah. Well, that's world building and arguments and a lot of Star Wars stuff.
Yeah, a lot of Star Wars, but Star Wars is cool, so what have you.
Yeah, so we're gonna end it there. Keep writing, like we said earlier. Get up on the website, join up, read, write, rate, review. Let's get a conversation started about writing. You guys can leave comments on the YouTube video here too, and tell us how wrong we are about Star Wars.
Yeah,
I'm sure some of you are chomping at the bit to do that.
Yeah,
and
punch me in the head. How dare you look up?
So that's all we got for this week. Thanks for listening.
Take care, everybody.